Statistics say that in a high-stakes robbery, 90% of people feel their heart rate jump to over 180 beats per minute.
Why are you begging?
Because I've already died once.
The room is secure, sir. Take him to the lower levels.
She's the key!
About that signature.
Open it, Bellandi! See what your own people think of you!
This is the black box from the Bellandi transport ship.
Would the robber like to sign for the package?
Out now.
You're blocking my light. I need a signature for this package. Then do it.
Statistics say that in a high-stakes robbery, 90% of people feel their heart rate jump to over 180 beats per minute. They panic, they scream, they beg. But on a rainy Monday morning inside a high-tech warehouse office overlooking the city, Solene Price did none of those things. When a heavy handgun was leveled at her forehead by a man in a silver ballistic mask, she didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply tapped her electronic tablet and asked if the robber would like to sign for the package since the boss was busy. It was the coldest thing anyone in the room had ever seen. And watching from behind the marble desk was Bellandi, the one man dangerous enough to know exactly how to use a woman who wasn't afraid to die. The high-tech cooling fans of the Bellandi warehouse hummed with a low electric vibration that usually made visitors feel on edge. For Solene Price, it was just background noise. It was 10:14 a.m. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city skyline into a blurry smear of gray and charcoal. Solene adjusted her heavy backpack, the bright teal and yellow fabric of her courier jacket standing out like a neon sign against the dark, expensive room. She was in her early 30s, but her gray-green eyes looked like they had seen centuries. They were calm, detached, and missing the customer service smile most people expected. She had been a delivery driver for 5 years. The job kept her moving, and more importantly, it made her invisible. People look at the package, they never look at the person holding it. The office was mostly silent. At the massive marble desk sat the man who ran the district. Bellandi didn't look like a criminal. He looked like an aristocrat. He wore a forest green turtleneck under a charcoal coat that fit him perfectly. His salt and pepper beard was trimmed with precision. He sat perfectly still, his dark eyes heavy with the kind of experience that usually made men tremble. He hadn't spoken since she walked in. He just watched the rain. The rain didn't bother Solene Price. To most people in the city, the downpour was a reason to run for cover or complain about ruined shoes. To Solene, it was just physics water falling at a certain speed, slicking the pavement and turning the world into a blurry mess of gray and charcoal. She leaned her bike into a sharp turn, her tires hissing against the wet asphalt of the industrial district. She was lean and athletic, a shape carved out by years of pedaling through traffic and climbing endless flights of stairs. Her movements weren't the result of a gym membership, they were the result of survival. Her bright teal and yellow courier jacket was a loud splash of color against the dark, rainy morning. It was scuffed at the elbows and frayed at the cuffs, showing the wear and tear of 1,000 previous deliveries. The waterproof fabric hummed as the wind whipped past her. Underneath her helmet, her face remained perfectly still. Her gray-green eyes didn't squint against the spray from passing trucks. They simply scanned the road, calculating distances and timing the red lights with robotic precision. A faint scar cut through her left eyebrow, a tiny white line that stayed hidden until the streetlights caught it. She didn't remember exactly which delivery had given it to her, maybe a jagged door frame or a fallen crate. It didn't matter. In her world, pain was just another data point, something to be noted and then ignored. She felt the weight of the package in her heavy backpack. It wasn't large, but it was important. The priority tag was taped firmly to the side, glowing under the dim sky. This was her last route of the day, a final stop before she could head back to her small, quiet apartment and disappear into the shadows of the city. The industrial district was a maze of corrugated steel and high concrete walls. As she approached the Bellandi warehouse, the buildings grew taller and the security cameras more frequent. Most delivery drivers hated this part of town. They didn't like the way the tinted windows of black SUVs followed their progress. They didn't like the heavy silence that hung over the area. Even during the busiest hours of the day, Solene didn't care. Her posture remained relaxed, her hands steady on the handlebars. She didn't feel the creepiness that others talked about. She didn't feel the chill of the rain soaking into her collar. She felt nothing but the rhythm of her own breathing and the steady beat of the city. She slowed as she reached the massive iron gates of the Bellandi property. A security guard in a dark uniform stepped out of a booth, his hand resting near his belt. He looked at the rain, then at the bright teal jacket, and then at Solene's face. He expected to see a tired, wet woman eager to get out of the storm. Instead, he found himself looking into eyes that were as cold and steady as the rain itself. Without a word, she reached into her pocket and held up her digital ID. The guard checked the screen, his brow furrowed. He nodded slowly, and the heavy gates began to groan open. The elevator doors opened with a soft digital sound. Solene Price stepped out into a very quiet floor. Downstairs, the warehouse was loud with the noise of trucks and workers. But up here in the heart of the Mafia world, it was very still. The air smelled like a new car and expensive soap. Solene moved her heavy bag. Her bright teal and yellow courier jacket looked very bright in the dark, expensive hallway. Her boots were a little muddy, and she left small footprints on the shiny black floor. She didn't look at the cameras in the corners. She knew they were watching her. She didn't look at the two men in suits at the end of the hall either. They stood very still like statues. Their eyes followed the box in her arms as if it were a bomb. Some people called this floor the inner sanctum. It was the place where the most dangerous man in the city made his big choices. To Solene, it was just the last stop on her rainy morning route. Her heart beat slowly and steadily. She wasn't scared. After years of working in the tough city, she had forgotten how to feel fear. She just wanted to finish her job and get out of the rain. The big office doors opened by themselves. The room was full of dark colors. Huge windows showed the city outside, but it was hard to see because of the heavy rain. At the middle of the room was a giant desk made of black marble. Marco Bellandi sat behind it. He looked like a king in a movie. He wore a dark forest green sweater and a tailored charcoal coat. His beard was black and gray, and his dark eyes were heavy with secrets. He was reading some papers. He didn't look up when Solene walked in. In this office, everyone had to wait for him. It was a power move, but it didn't work on her. Solene walked across the room. Her reflection showed in the shiny floor. She stopped right in front of the marble desk. She didn't look nervous at all. Her arms were crossed, and she stood in a relaxed way, as if she were waiting for a bus. "I have a priority delivery for Mr. Bellandi," she said. Her voice was calm and flat. Marco finally looked up. He didn't just look at her face, he looked at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. He saw her lean, athletic body, and the way she didn't shake in his presence. He noticed the tiny white scar that cut through her eyebrow. Most people who came here were sweating or talking too fast. Solene was just standing there, waiting for him to do his part. "You are late, Solene," Marco said. His voice was very deep and sounded like stones grinding together. "The rain is heavy today, Mr. Bellandi," she answered. She pulled out her electronic tablet. The blue light from the screen showed in her gray-green eyes. Her eyes were as still as a quiet pond in the woods. "I still need you to sign for this." She put the package on the black marble desk. It was a small box wrapped in black plastic. It felt very heavy. Marco reached out with a silver pen. His hands were big and strong with scars on the knuckles. He looked at the tablet, then he looked back at Solene. For a moment, the room was perfectly quiet. This was the steady beat of her day. Then the quiet was broken. A loud boom came from the hallway. The floor shook under Solene's feet. The heavy doors behind her were kicked open so hard they hit the walls with a crash. The heavy double doors didn't just open, they were erased. The sound was like a car crash in a library, a violent metallic boom that swallowed the hum of the cooling fans and the rhythm of the rain. Before the echo could even fade, the two guards by the entrance were on the floor. There was no shouting, no wasted breath, just the clinical, muffled thud of professional efficiency. Solene didn't jump. She didn't drop her tablet. She simply turned her head toward the sound, her gray-green eyes tracking the movement with the same focus she used to check a street sign. Kieran Black stepped through the settling dust. He was a mountain of maroon and silver. His tactical suit was the color of dried blood, reinforced with black armor that looked like it had seen plenty of use. But it was the mask that pulled the light from the room. It was a smooth, silver ballistic plate that hid every human feature. No eyes, no mouth, just a cold, metallic reflection of the rainy city outside. He moved like a wolf in a suit of armor, economical, controlled, and perfectly aware of the space he occupied. Behind her, Solene heard the sharp gasp of the young assistant and the frantic sliding of a chair. The office staff was doing exactly what people were supposed to do. They were panicking. They were becoming victims. But Solene just shifted her weight, her teal and yellow jacket rustling slightly. She looked at the handgun in Kieran's black-gloved grip. It was a professional tool, held with the kind of certainty that only came from years of practice. He leveled the weapon at the center of the room, his presence instantly turning the high-tech office into a kill zone. Bellandi didn't move either. From her peripheral vision, Solene saw the Mafia Boss remain seated in his leather chair. His jaw tightened just a fraction, a subtle ripple beneath his salt and pepper beard, but he didn't reach for a weapon or duck for cover. He was a man who had seen death walk through his door many times before. He just sat there, his forest green turtleneck dark against the charcoal of his coat, watching the silver-masked intruder with heavy, calculating eyes. Kieran's boots crunched on a piece of debris as he advanced toward the marble desk. He ignored the assistant sobbing in the corner. He ignored the guards groaning on the floor. His focus was entirely on Marco, but the bright teal shape of Solene was in his way. "Out," Kieran rumbled. His voice was distorted by the mask, sounding hollow and metallic. Solene didn't move. She stood between the man with the gun and the man with the power. She felt the cold air from the hallway rushing into the warm office, smelling of wet pavement and ozone. She looked at the silver mask, seeing her own tiny, distorted reflection in the polished metal. She didn't feel the rush of adrenaline that usually makes a person's hands shake. There was only a familiar, hollow silence in her chest. To her, this wasn't a life or death moment. It was just another delay in her route. Kieran stopped 3 feet away from her. The barrel of the gun was now inches from her chest, a black hole designed to end stories. He tilted his head, the silver mask catching a glint of the orange desk lamp. He was waiting for her to scream. He was waiting for her to run. Solene looked down at her tablet, then back up at the expressionless silver face. "You're blocking my light," she said, her voice as flat and steady as the rain on the window. For the first time since he had exploded through the doors, Kieran Black hesitated. The muzzle of the handgun was a cold, black circle only inches from Solene Price's forehead. Kieran Black leaned in, his silver ballistic mask catching the orange glow of the desk lamps. Behind that expressionless metal face, he was waiting for the sound that usually followed a breach like this. A gasp, a sob, or the shaky breath of someone realizing their life was about to end. But Solene didn't give him the satisfaction. She stood lean and athletic in her scuffed teal and yellow jacket, her arms crossed over her chest in a relaxed pose. Her gray-green eyes didn't widen in fear, they simply tracked the movement of the gun with the clinical boredom of a person watching a slow elevator. She looked like a woman who had already decided how this encounter would end, and a weapon wasn't enough to change her mind. Kieran shifted his weight, his maroon tactical armor creaking slightly. He was used to being the most terrifying thing in the room. He was a professional, built to intimidate, and his presence usually turned people into shaking piles of nerves. Yet, this delivery lady was treated him like an annoying delay in her schedule. "Did you hear me, girl?" Kieran's voice came through the mask, muffled and harsh. "On the floor. Now." Solene didn't move. She didn't even blink. "I heard you," she said, her voice flat and steady. "But I'm on a clock. If I don't give a signature for this package in the next 60 seconds, the system marks it as a failed delivery. That's a lot of paperwork for me, and I'm sure Mr. Bellandi doesn't want his priority shipment sitting in a warehouse because you're having a moment." Kieran's gloved hand tightened on the grip of his pistol. A vein throbbed against the side of his neck, visible just above the collar of his suit. He was a man of economical, controlled movement, but Solene's lack of fear was causing his composure to crack. He wanted her to scream. He needed her to beg. It was the only way the world made sense to a man like him. He pressed the gun harder against her skin, right where the faint scar cut through her eyebrow. "You think this is a joke?" he hissed. "I could end you before you finish that sentence." "Then do it," Solene replied. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even sound brave. She just sounded tired. "But while you're deciding, the tablet is still waiting for a signature. Are you signing, or is he?" The barrel of the handgun was cold against the skin of her forehead, a sharp contrast to the humid air of the rainy morning. Kieran Black leaned in, his silver ballistic mask inches from Solene's face. The office lights caught the curved highlights of the metal, making him look like a faceless statue brought to life. He was breathing hard, the economical movements he had displayed moments ago fraying into a jagged, dangerous frustration. "You think this is a game?" Kieran's voice was a harsh rasp behind the mask. "I could pull this trigger and your brain would be on that marble desk before you could blink. Why aren't you begging? Why aren't you crying like the rest of them?" Solene didn't pull away. She didn't even shift her weight. Her arms remained crossed over the teal and yellow fabric of her jacket, her posture as relaxed as if she were waiting for a light to change. In the background, Marco Bellandi sat perfectly still in his charcoal coat, his heavy, dark eyes fixed on the delivery woman. He wasn't looking at the intruder, he was studying the way Solene's pulse didn't even visible throb in her neck. "It's just a job, Kieran," Solene said. Her voice wasn't brave, it was empty. It was the sound of a woman who had run out of fear years ago. She slowly raised a hand, not to fight, but to trace the faint white line of the scar that cut through her left eyebrow. Kieran flinched, the gun twitching in his grip, but she didn't stop. "You see this?" she asked, her gray-green eyes locking onto the dark slits of his mask. "I didn't get this in a war. I got it on a Tuesday morning in the middle of a winter storm. I was 18, delivering a heart transplant cooler on a bicycle because the roads were too jammed for ambulances. A taxi hit me doing 40 on black ice. I went through the windshield and the cooler went flying." She let her hand drop back to her side. Her expression remains as flat as a dial tone. "I spent 45 minutes pinned under the bumper of a town car while my blood froze to the pavement. I watched the clock on a nearby bank sign, counting the seconds, knowing that if I didn't get up, someone on an operating table was going to die because of a patch of ice. I didn't have a gun to my head then. I just had the cold." She took a tiny step forward, closing the gap until the muzzle of Kieran's pistol was actually pressing a ring into her skin. "I've already felt the end of the world," she whispered. "It didn't have a name and it didn't wear a mask. It was just a quiet, heavy weight that didn't care if I lived or died. Compared to that, you're just a man with a piece of lead. You're a variable I didn't account for on my route, nothing more." A heavy silence followed. The rain continued its rhythmic assault on the windows, a blue and charcoal blur of the city outside. Kieran's professional certainty seemed to waver. He was a man who traded in terror, but you cannot sell fear to someone who has already bought into the silence of the grave. From behind the desk, a low, grinding sound broke the tension. It was the sound of Marco Bellandi's chair pivoting. He leaned forward, the forest green of his turtleneck catching the dim office light. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched his salt and pepper beard, a sharp, predatory expression. "She's right, Kieran," Marco rumbled, his voice echoing with a terrifying authority. "She's a professional, and you're currently wasting her time, which in this room is a far greater sin than threatening my life." Solene didn't look back at the boss. She just lifted her electronic tablet one more time, the screen glowing a soft, clinical blue in the shadows of the standoff. "Signature, please," she said. "I have 3 more stops in this district, and the rain is getting worse." Marco Bellandi sat perfectly still. He was a man who lived by watching people. He watched how their hands shook when they were scared. He watched how their eyes darted toward the exit when they were guilty. Most people were like open books, and usually those books were full of fear. But Solene Price was different. In front of his desk, the room felt like it was about to catch fire. Kieran Black stood there like a mountain of maroon armor and silver metal. His handgun was a heavy, dark weight pointed straight at Solene's head. Most people would be on their knees by now. Most people would be crying for their lives. Solene didn't even move her feet. Marco watched her through the steam of his coffee, which he hadn't touched. He looked at her lean, athletic frame. He saw the way her teal and yellow jacket didn't rustle. Her breathing was slow. It was steady. It was the breathing of someone who was counting seconds, not someone who was about to die. Kieran's voice came out from behind the silver mask, sounding like a growl. "You think this is a joke, girl? I will end you right here." Solene didn't look at the gun. She didn't even look at Kieran's masked face. She kept her gray-green eyes fixed on her electronic tablet. "The signature line is at the bottom, sir," she said. Her voice was flat. It had no tremor. It was as cold as the rain hitting the glass behind them. "If you don't sign, I have to mark this as a failed delivery. My boss doesn't like failed deliveries." Marco felt a tightening in his jaw. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, sharp interest. As a writer of stories in the mafia romance genre, the user has created a world where such tension is the ultimate prize. Marco had spent millions of dollars on bodyguards and soldiers. He had men who could shoot a target from a mile away, but he had never seen anyone with this kind of ice in their blood. He looked at the small scar on her eyebrow. He realized it wasn't a mark of a victim. It was a mark of someone who had already survived the worst the world could throw at her. She wasn't brave because she was a hero. She was brave because she had reached a point where fear didn't matter anymore. Kieran was getting frustrated. The intruder was used to power. He was used to people cowering. When Solene didn't flinch, he lost his rhythm. He stepped closer, pressing the cold barrel of the pistol against her forehead. "Sign it," Solene repeated. She didn't pull away. She leaned into the weapon just a tiny bit, as if she were helping him aim. Marco saw the value then. A person who doesn't fear death cannot be controlled by a threat. A person who doesn't fear death is the most dangerous tool in the world. He realized that Solene Price didn't belong on a delivery bike. She belonged in a room where the stakes were much higher. He finally moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion. He set his cup down on the marble. The sound was small, but in the tense silence, it sounded like a cannon shot. "That's enough, Kieran," Marco said. His voice was quiet, but it filled every corner of the warehouse. The intruder froze. The power in the room shifted instantly. Marco wasn't looking at the gunman. He was looking at Solene. He was looking at her like a man who had just found a diamond in a pile of coal. Solene finally looked away from her tablet. She looked at Marco. For the first time, a small spark of recognition crossed her face. She saw that he wasn't just a boss. He was a predator who had found another predator. Marco smiled, though his eyes remained heavy and dark. "She told you to sign, didn't she? Do what the lady says." In that moment, Marco Bellandi knew he wasn't going to let Solene Price walk out of that door, at least not as a delivery driver. He had found something rare. He had found a shadow that didn't hide from the light. Perfect, he thought. She is exactly what I need. The air in the office felt thick, like the moments right before a massive thunderstorm. Kieran Black stood perfectly still, his maroon tactical suit casting a dark shadow on the polished floor. His silver mask didn't move, but the barrel of his gun had finally dipped an inch. Marco Bellandi's voice had done that. It wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a mountain. Solene Price didn't look at the intruder. She didn't look at the gun. Her eyes were fixed on the black box sitting on the marble desk. To her, it was just another delivery, another priority tag in a life full of them. She reached out with one steady hand and pushed the package toward the center of the desk. "The signature is complete," Solene said. Her voice was as flat as a dial tone. "The delivery is made." Marco Bellandi didn't look at the intruder either. He didn't even look at the guards who had finally rushed into the room to pin Kieran's arms. His focus was entirely on the box and the woman who had brought it. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cold surface of the package. With a slow, deliberate movement, he flipped the latch. The lid clicked open. Inside, nestled in custom-cut black foam, wasn't a bomb or a pile of cash. It was a single shattered glass data core. It was a high-tech piece of hardware that looked like a jagged diamond, glowing with a faint, pulse-like orange light. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire from a few minutes ago. Marco's jaw tightened. He didn't look surprised, he looked disgusted. He picked up the core and the orange light reflected in his dark, experienced eyes. The This wasn't just a delivery, it was a message. The data core was the black box from a Bellandi transport ship that had gone missing 3 nights ago. Only a handful of people knew it even existed. The fact that a common courier had walked it through his front door meant everything had changed. Kieran Black let out a raspy metallic laugh from behind his silver mask. You see it now, Bellandi. It didn't come from the outside. Your own people sent her. They used a nobody to bring you the evidence of your own end. Marco looked from the glowing glass to Solene. She was still standing with her arms crossed. Her teal and yellow jacket was damp from the rain, but her face was a mask of stone. She didn't look like a nobody. She looked like the only person in the room who wasn't playing a game. Did you know what was in here? Marco rumbled. Solene met his gaze. Her gray-green eyes didn't flicker. I don't get paid to know. I get paid to move. Rain, guns, or masks, it doesn't change the route. Marco stood up. He was taller than he looked when he was sitting. He ignored the intruder and the guards. He walked around the desk until he was standing inches away from Solene. The forest green of his sweater made a sharp contrast against the bright yellow of her uniform. He realized then that Kieran was wrong. His people hadn't used Solene because she was a nobody. They had used her because she was the only person with the icy nerves required to walk into a lion's den without shaking. The route is over, Solene, Marco said quietly. He held the shattered core between them. This package just proved that everyone I trust is a liar. Everyone except the woman who stayed calm while a gun was at her head. He turned to his guards, his voice turning back into cold steel. Take the intruder to the basement. I'll deal with the traitors later. Then he looked back at Solene. A small, dangerous smile touched his lips. You're not going back to your bike. I have a new route for you, and it pays much better than teal and yellow. The silver mask of the intruder seemed to vibrate with a mix of anger and confusion. Kieran Black had come for a score, but he had not planned on a delivery lady who treated a handgun like a minor delay in her schedule. Solene stood perfectly still, her teal and yellow jacket a bright spark of defiance in the dim, rain-streaked office. Her gray-green eyes never left the hollow black circle of the gun barrel. She did not look at Marco. She did not look at the doors. She just waited for the world to catch up to her calm. Then, the silence did not just break, it was erased. There was no shouting and no dramatic warning. The heavy office doors glided open on silent hinges, and 4 men in charcoal suits moved in with the fluid speed of ghosts. They did not look like guards. They looked like shadows that had learned how to hold weapons. Before Kieran could pull the trigger or even turn his head, the first man was on him. A gloved hand gripped the slide of Kieran's gun, jamming the metal, while a second man delivered a swift strike to the back of the intruder's knee. Kieran, the broad-shouldered mountain in maroon armor, went down hard. His silver mask clattered against the marble floor, reflecting the orange glow of the desk lamps one last time before a heavy boot pinned his chest down. Solene did not scream. She did not dive for cover. She simply stepped 2 inches to the left to make sure Kieran's flailing arm did not knock the priority package off the desk. She watched the struggle with the same detached interest someone might use to watch a bug crawl across a sidewalk. To her, this was not a life or death battle, it was just a mess that needed to be cleared so she could finish her route. Marco Bellandi did not move from his leather chair. He did not even stand up to see the man who had tried to rob him. His dark, heavy eyes were fixed entirely on Solene. He watched the way she did not tremble. He watched the way she checked the screen of her tablet to make sure the glass had not cracked during the scuffle. "The room is secure, sir," one of the men in charcoal rumbled. His voice was as cold and professional as the rain outside. "Clean it up," Marco said, his voice a low, gravelly command. "And take him to the lower levels. I will deal with the silver-masked fool later." In less than 30 seconds, the office was empty of intruders. The charcoal-suited men dragged Kieran out, his maroon tactical suit trailing across the floor until the doors hissed shut again. The only evidence that a robbery had even happened was a single scuff mark on the polished floor and the lingering smell of rain and wet pavement. Solene adjusted the strap of her heavy backpack. She looked at the faint scar on her eyebrow and the reflection of a nearby monitor and then turned back to the Mafia Boss. The room was quiet again, filled only with the hum of the high-tech fans and the rain on the glass. "Now," Solene said, her voice flat and rhythmic, "about that signature, Mr. Bellandi. I have 3 more stops in this district, and the weather is not getting any better." Marco leaned forward, his forest green turtleneck visible under his coat, as he finally reached for the stylus. He was not looking at the tablet. He was looking at the woman who had just stared down death and only cared about her delivery window. For the first time that morning, the jaw of the most dangerous man in the city tightened with something that looked like respect. "You are not going back out into the rain, Solene," he said softly. "Not for a courier company anyway." The ringing in the large room slowly faded, replaced by the steady drip, drip, drip of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The silver mask of the intruder lay on the polished floor, a cold reminder of the violence that had just been silenced. Marco Bellandi remained behind his massive marble desk, his dark eyes fixed on the woman in the bright teal and yellow courier jacket. She had not moved an inch since the guns were lowered. Her posture was still relaxed, her arms crossed over her chest as if she were waiting for a bus instead of standing in the middle of a crime scene. Marco leaned forward, the forest green wool of his turtleneck catching the dim light of the high-tech warehouse. He did not look at his guards or the mess on the floor, he only looked at Solene. He saw the faint scar that cut through her eyebrow and the way her gray-green eyes did not even blink. She was a splash of loud color in his gray, expensive world, yet she was quieter than the shadows. The doors were open, Marco rumbled, his voice like heavy stones grinding together. When he kicked them in, you had 3 seconds. 3 seconds to run, to hide under the desk, or to scream like the others did. He paused, his heavy eyes searching her face for a spark of fear that was not there. "Why didn't you run, Solene Price?" Solene did not shift her weight. She did not look at the guns or the danger. She looked directly at the man who owned the city. "I have 3 more deliveries to make before noon," she said, her voice flat and mechanical. "If I ran, I would be late. If I hid, I would lose my bonus. And if I screamed..." She trailed off, a tiny, cold smile touching her lips. It would not have changed where the bullet went. Marco's jaw tightened slightly, a subtle sign that he was stunned. He had spent his life around men who used fear as a tool, but he had never met someone who simply did not feel it. He realized then that her calm was not a choice. It was an emotional numbness, a detachment from a world that had already tried to break her and failed. She did not value her life enough to be afraid of losing it. "You think your life is worth less than a delivery bonus?" Marco asked, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "I think my life is just a series of routes," Solene replied. "Today, the route went through a robbery. It is just another delay." Marco stood up slowly, his charcoal coat hanging perfectly on his broad shoulders. He walked around the desk until he was standing just inches away from her. He was a man who ordered deaths from quiet rooms, and he knew a weapon when he saw one. Solene did not pull away, she did not even breathe faster. She just waited, invisible and icy, for the next instruction. "An unfair trade," Marco murmured. "You give your courage to a company that pays you in pennies, while I have been looking for someone with your eyes for a long time." He reached out and tapped the electronic tablet she was still holding. "Forget the signature, Solene. You are not leaving this warehouse in that jacket." The silence in the office was heavier than the gunfire had been. It was the kind of quiet that followed a big storm, thick with the smell of rain and the sharp scent of metal. Marco Bellandi did not move. He sat behind his large marble desk, his dark eyes fixed on Solene. He looked at her like he was trying to solve a difficult puzzle. Solene did not move either. She did not look at the clock or check her phone. Her teal and yellow courier jacket was dirty from the road, and there was a tiny spot of blood on her sleeve from the intruder, but her face was as calm as a lake. She held out her electronic tablet, the blue light from the screen glowing against her hand. "The delivery is finished, Mr. Bellandi," she said. Her voice was flat and steady. "I just need your signature." Marco did not reach for the pen. Instead, he leaned back in his leather chair. The charcoal fabric of his coat made a soft sound as he moved. "You are very strange, Solene Price. Most people would have run out of this room by now. They would be crying or calling for the police, but you are standing here asking for a signature for a package that almost cost you your life. A job is a job, Solene replied. The tiny scar on her eyebrow moved slightly as she spoke. If I don't get your signature, the system says the delivery is not done. I do not get paid for deliveries that are not done. Marco let out a slow breath. His jaw tightened just a little bit. How much do they pay you to be invisible, to ride through the rain and the traffic and deal with men in masks? Enough to keep going, she said. Moving is not the same as getting somewhere, Marco said in a low, rumbling voice. He stood up slowly. He walked over to the giant windows. Outside, the rain made the city lights look like blurry spots of orange and blue. I have many drivers. I have hundreds of them. They are like parts of a machine. I can replace them whenever I want. He turned back to look at her. The light from the desk lamp hit his salt and pepper beard. But I do not have anyone who can stand still when a gun is pointed at them. I do not have anyone who cares more about their work than their fear. Solene lowered her tablet. What are you trying to say? I am offering you a new contract, Marco said. He stepped closer to her. He smelled like expensive wood and old books. The things I need you to carry from now on will not fit in a yellow backpack. They are secrets. They are important items that must stay hidden. I need someone who the world looks at but never really sees. He looked at her scuffed jacket and her relaxed posture. You have spent years being a delivery girl that everyone ignores. In my world, that is a great power. I am offering you a seat at a different table. No more rain, no more bikes, no more being ignored. Solene looked at the tablet in her hand, then at the man who owned the city. She usually felt nothing, but now she felt something new. It was a small spark of interest. She had spent her whole life just trying to get by, but she had never been given a real chance to be someone important. And if I say no, she asked. Then you walk out that door and go back to being a ghost, Marco said. His voice was quiet but strong. But we both know you are too big for that jacket now. Solene looked at the teal fabric on her arm. It felt tight and heavy. She reached out and placed the tablet on the marble desk. The screen turned black. Where do I sign? She asked. Marco did not smile, but his eyes looked pleased. In my world, Solene, we do not use tablets. We use loyalty and silence. He reached into his desk and pulled out a simple black folder with no markings on it. He slid it across the desk toward her. Welcome to the shadow, Solene. The rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows had slowed to a steady, rhythmic hum, but the city outside remained a blurred smear of charcoal and neon. Inside the office, the air was heavy with the smell of ozone and expensive coffee. The chaos of the morning was gone. The men in suits had finished the cleanup, and the silence that followed was even louder than the gunfire. Solene stood by the window, her reflection ghosting against the glass. The bright teal and yellow fabric of her courier jacket looked almost offensive in the sleek, minimalist room. It was a uniform for a person who was meant to be ignored. It was the skin of a woman who spent her life dodging puddles and chasing signatures for people who never learned her name. Behind the marble desk, Marco Bellandi sat perfectly still. He hadn't put his charcoal coat back on. He sat in his forest green turtleneck, his salt and pepper beard catching the light as he watched her. He wasn't looking at her as a delivery girl anymore. He was looking at her like a man who had just discovered a diamond in a pile of glass. The bike is still out front, Marco rumbled, his voice like heavy stones grinding together. The keys are in your pocket. You could walk out that door, finish your route, and go back to being invisible. You could pretend this morning never happened. Solene didn't turn around. She watched a single raindrop trail down the glass, cutting a path through the grime. Invisible is safe, she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the sparkle or fear most people showed in this room. Safe is just another word for forgotten, Marco countered. He stood up slowly, his movements economical and controlled. He walked to the edge of the desk and set a small, heavy black card on the marble. I don't need someone who is safe. I need someone who can look at a silver mask and a loaded gun and ask for a signature. I need that coldness, Solene. It's not a flaw. In my world, it's a crown. Solene finally turned. Her gray-green eyes met his dark, heavy gaze. For the first time in years, the robotic feeling in her chest didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a tool. She looked down at the teal sleeve of her jacket, scuffed at the elbow from a fall she'd taken months ago on a slippery street. That life was about surviving the world. The life Marco was offering was about making the world survive her. She didn't say a word. She reached for the zipper of her jacket. The sound of the plastic teeth pulling apart was sharp in the quiet room. She slid the sleeves off her arms and let the bright, cheap fabric fall to the floor. It crumpled in a heap of teal and yellow, a discarded shell. Underneath, she wore a simple black thermal shirt that made her look lean and athletic, like a shadow waiting to be cast. She stepped over the jacket, leaving it behind like a ghost of her old self. She walked toward the desk, her boots making a firm, decided sound on the stone. She reached out and picked up the black card. The weight of it was substantial. "The rain is stopping," Marco noted, watching her. Solene tucked the card into her pocket and looked toward the heavy office doors that led deeper into the Bellandi empire. The faint scar on her eyebrow caught the light as she tilted her head. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice steady and certain. "I'm done working in the light." She turned away from the windows and stepped into the deeper shadows of the office, walking beside the man who had seen her true value. The delivery girl was gone. Solene Price had finally arrived. The teal jacket is on the floor, and Solene Price is officially done working in the light. In a world where everyone else screams and begs, she chose the cold silence of the shadows. But would you? Drop a comments if you'd take Marco's deal and the power that comes with it, or a bicycle if you'd have kept the bike and the safety of the rain. The delivery is just beginning. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2, the first contract, where we see exactly what Solene has to deliver now that she's no longer carrying packages.